The galaxy had once whispered her name with reverence. Now it spat it like a curse. Commander Valara Threx of the Aran Dominion had been many things in her life: strategist, war hero, diplomat, and, for a brief and glorious decade, the shield of the Outer Rim. Her fleet had stopped pirate confederacies, dismantled slaver cartels, and turned back the crimson tide of the Corthan Swarm. But none of that mattered anymore, because the galaxy remembered only one thing. She had failed. The Corthan Swarm had returned, evolved and united under a single overmind. Entire sectors had fallen in weeks. Dominion High Command had ordered a final stand at Virex Prime, a fortress world with orbital cannons capable of cracking moons. Valara had held the line for 9 days. On the 10th, the sky fell. When the Corthan bioships breached Virex Prime's atmosphere and the surface turned into a storm of acid rain and screaming metal, she gave the order to retreat. It saved the remnants of her fleet. It doomed the planet. Billions died. And the galaxy decided she should have died with them. The exile. 2 years later, Valara drifted on the edge of known space in a patched civilian freighter with false registry codes and a broken transponder. Her once sleek silver combat armor had been replaced by dull fabric and a hood that hid her crest. She moved from system to system, avoiding Dominion patrols, mercenary hunters, and anyone who might recognize her face from the countless news streams that had labeled her the Butcher of Virex. She told herself she was searching for something, redemption, perhaps, or death. But in truth, she was running. Running from judgment. Running from ghosts. Running from the moment she had looked at the tactical display and realized she could not win. The human colony. The freighter's engines were failing when she found it. A small colony world on the frontier, designation, Terra Nova 3. Population, 48,000. Species human. Valara had heard of humans. A relatively new interstellar species. Adaptive. Stubborn. Short-lived. Dangerous in strange and unpredictable ways. The colony's orbital presence was laughable: 2 outdated defense satellites and a mining station retrofitted with railguns. She considered bypassing the system. Then her engine sputtered. She descended. The colony leader was a human named Elias Ward. He met her in a modest command building overlooking fields of wind harvesters and solar arrays. He was taller than most species Valara knew, with graying hair and eyes that had seen too much for someone who ruled a farming world. "You're not just a trader," he said calmly after glancing at her forged credentials. "You carry yourself like someone used to giving orders." Valara kept her voice neutral. "Old habits." "You're welcome to repair your ship here," Elias said. "But I should warn you, we've been picking up strange signals at the edge of the system." Valara felt her pulse quicken. What kind of signals? Organic. Coordinated. Moving fast. Her blood turned cold. The Corthan Swarm. The return of the swarm. The scans confirmed it. A vanguard tendril of the Corthan, 3 bioships and dozens of assault organisms, had deviated from the main war front and was cutting across unprotected frontier worlds. Terra Nova 3 was directly in its path. Valara stood in the colony's small tactical room, staring at the holographic projection. It was laughably inadequate compared to Dominion war chambers. And yet the fear in the room was painfully familiar. "How long?" Elias asked. 17 hours. She replied quietly. The human leaders looked at one another. "What do we do?" one of them whispered. Valara knew the answer. "Evacuate what you can. Run." It was what she had done at Virex. It was what she had done every day since. She opened her mouth to speak the word, but she hesitated. The ghost of Virex. That night, she walked alone through the colony fields. The wind moved through tall grain like waves on an ocean of gold. Children ran between the rows, laughing, unaware of what was coming. She saw Virex Prime in her mind, burning cities, collapsing shields, soldiers screaming for orders she could not give. She had calculated survival probabilities. She had weighed tactical assets. She had chosen logic, and billions had died. "You look like someone who's lost," a voice said behind her. Elias Ward stood a few meters away. "I've lost before," Valara replied. "So have we," he said. "Earth wasn't exactly a peaceful paradise when we left it." She studied him. "You don't understand what's coming. Then help us understand. It's a swarm intelligence that adapts in real time. It learns from every weapon you fire. It consumes biomass to grow stronger. You cannot outlast it. You cannot negotiate with it." Elias nodded slowly. "Then I guess we fight it." Valara stared at him. "You will die." "Maybe," he said. "But this is our home." Home. The word struck her harder than any accusation ever had. The choice. At dawn, the colony assembled in the central square. Farmers, engineers, miners, teachers, armed with outdated rifles and improvised explosives. They were terrified, but they were not leaving. Valara stepped forward before she could stop herself. "I know this enemy," she said. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "I've fought them. I've lost to them." The murmurs grew louder. "But I also learned from them." Silence fell. "If you run, they will hunt you. If you scatter, they will isolate and consume you. The only way to survive is to force them into a choke point, limit their adaptability, make them pay for every meter." Elias looked at her carefully. "And you'll help us do that?" Valara hesitated. This was the moment. Run again. Or stand. A human child stepped forward from the crowd, clutching a crude metal pendant shaped like the colony's sun. "Are you a soldier?" the child asked. Valara swallowed. "Yes." The child nodded. "Then stay." And something inside her, something buried beneath guilt and shame, ignited. She turned to Elias. "Seal the northern canyon. It's the only viable ground approach from their projected landing zone. Collapse the outer bridges. Rig the mining tunnels with explosives." Elias's lips curved into a faint smile. "Now you sound like a commander." Valara lifted her chin. "No," she said. "I sound like someone who's done running." The Battle of Terra Nova 3. The Korthan bioships descended like living comets, tearing through the upper atmosphere in streaks of fire. They landed beyond the northern canyon. The ground shook as the first wave emerged, multi-limbed horrors of chitin and muscle, guided by a distant overmind. Valara stood at the canyon's edge in borrowed combat armor, her crest uncovered for the first time in years. "Hold your fire," she ordered. The humans obeyed. The first wave poured into the narrow canyon. "Now." Railguns thundered from hidden emplacements. Explosives detonated, collapsing rock walls and crushing hundreds of organisms. The swarm adapted quickly, sending climbing units along the canyon walls. Valara anticipated it. Phase 2. Mining lasers ignited, sweeping across the canyon sides in controlled arcs, turning stone into molten rivers. The smell of burning biomass filled the air. The humans fought with desperate ferocity. They were not as technologically advanced as Dominion soldiers, but they were inventive. Improvised shock mines, electrified barriers, drones repurposed into suicide bombers. The swarm pushed forward, meter by meter, body by body. Valara moved through the battlefield like a storm, issuing precise commands, redirecting fire, sealing breaches before they could widen. For the first time since Virex, she was not calculating survival. She was fighting. beside her. When the line broke, after 6 brutal hours, the canyon defenses began to fail. The swarm had deployed a siege organism, massive, armored, designed to absorb punishment while smaller units advanced beneath it. Human weapons barely slowed it. Valara knew what it was. A breach unit. If it broke through, the colony would fall within the hour. She opened a channel to Elias. "We need orbital support. Our satellites won't punch through that armor." "They don't need to." She transmitted coordinates. "You're too close," Elias warned. "I know." The plan was simple. Draw the breach unit forward. Overload the defense satellite's reactor. Drop it from orbit. Elias's voice was steady. "You won't make it out in time." Valara thought of Virex, of the order to retreat, of billions who had never been given a choice. "This time," she said softly, "I stay." She sprinted toward the advancing monster, firing concentrated bursts at its sensory nodes, forcing it to track her. It roared, a sound like tearing metal and grinding bone, and pursued. Behind her, human forces fell back to secondary positions. Above, the satellite began to descend. Valara reached the designated marker and turned to face the creature. For a moment, everything slowed. Fear vanished. Regret faded. There was only clarity. She would not run. She raised her weapon one final time, and a blast slammed into the breach unit side. A human dropship screamed overhead, cannons blazing. Elias's voice crackled in her calm. "You don't get to decide alone." Multiple civilian craft followed, unloading every weapon they had. The breach unit staggered. "Now!" Elias shouted. The satellite struck like a falling star. White light consumed the canyon. Aftermath. When Valara opened her eyes, the sky was quiet. Smoke drifted upward in thin gray spirals. The canyon was scarred and molten, but the swarm was gone. The remaining bioships had retreated, their vanguard annihilated. The colony still stood. Elias limped toward her through the debris. "You're terrible at heroic sacrifices," he said. Valara gave a weak laugh. "I'm out of practice." Around them, humans were cheering, hugging, crying, alive. She felt something she had not felt in years. Not pride, not absolution, but purpose. The message to the galaxy. 3 days later, Terra Nova 3 broadcast a transmission on open channels. Valara stood before the camera, her crest fully visible. "My name is Commander Valara Threx of the Aran Dominion," she began. The words echoed across systems that had once condemned her. "I failed at Virex Prime. I chose survival over defiance." She did not look away from the lens. "I was wrong." Behind her stood humans, farmers, engineers, children. "We held against the Korthan swarm, not because we were stronger, but because we stood together and refused to yield." She paused. "The swarm can adapt to weapons. It cannot adapt to resolve." Her gaze hardened. "To any world facing the darkness, do not run. Fortify. Coordinate. Fight." A faint smile touched her lips. "And if you need help, call Terra Nova 3. The transmission ended. Across the galaxy, something shifted. Not fear. Hope. The stand. Months later, Dominion representatives arrived in the system, not to arrest her, but to ask for her counsel. Reports had spread. The swarm had begun encountering unexpected resistance on multiple fronts, colonies applying the Terra Nova defense model. Valara stood once more in a war room. This time, humans stood beside Dominion officers as equals. She looked at the tactical map of the galaxy. The swarm was vast. The war was far from over. But for the first time, its advance had slowed. Elias leaned toward her. "Still thinking about running?" Valara watched icons representing defended worlds light up one by one. "No," she said. Then she straightened, voice ringing with command authority reborn. "Signal all allied systems." The room fell silent. Her eyes burned with fierce determination. "Stand and fight." The words did not echo. They ignited. Within hours of Valara's command, Terra Nova 3 became more than a frontier farming world. It became a signal fire. Encrypted packets spread across subspace relays. Human engineers shared canyon defense schematics. Dominion tacticians distributed revised anti-swarm formations based on Valara's new combat model, restrict adaptability, overwhelm neural relays, sever synaptic command chains. For the first time in years, the Korthan swarm encountered something unfamiliar. Resistance that did not break. The counteroffensive. 3 months later, the swarm returned. Not as a scouting tendril, as a fleet. 30 bioships darkened Terra Nova 3's sky. The Dominion wanted to evacuate the colony and regroup. Human command vessels began preparing fallback coordinates. Valara refused. "If we run now," she said calmly, "everything we've built collapses." Elias stood beside her in the command chamber overlooking the fields that had once grown only grain and hope. "Then this is where we draw the line," he said. Valara nodded. "This is where the galaxy learns who it is." The last defense of Terra Nova 3. The sky burned crimson as orbital cannons fired in synchronized arcs. Dominion cruisers translated from slipspace alongside human carriers retrofitted with heavy kinetic artillery. The swarm adapted quickly. They always did. Bioshields shimmered across their hulls. Boarding spores launched toward allied ships. Organic jammers disrupted targeting arrays. Valara watched the tactical display, her mind racing through variables. "Deploy decoy signatures on Vector 9, she ordered. "Human frigates, lure their flanking tendril toward the asteroid belt." "They'll be exposed," a Dominion officer warned. "They won't," Elias replied evenly. "Trust her." The maneuver worked. The swarm's left formation fractured as it pursued what it believed to be weakened prey. And then something extraordinary happened. The humans didn't retreat. They pivoted. They struck. A coordinated ambush detonated across the asteroid field, collapsing 3 bioships into spirals of shattered biomass. The overmind adjusted. It always adjusted. But something in its calculations began to misalign. Because this time the prey was adapting too. Groundfall. Despite orbital losses, 6 bioships breached the defensive line and descended toward the surface. Impact tremors split the northern continent. The canyon where Valara had first stood her ground became the landing zone once more. She armed herself in full Aran battle regalia, silver armor restored, crest illuminated, command sigils glowing across her shoulders. Elias met her at the hangar. "You don't have to be on the front line," he said. "Yes," she replied quietly. "I do." Dropships roared toward the surface. Below, the swarm poured out in numbers greater than before, towering siege organisms, razor-limbed skirmishers, airborne neural relays pulsing with hive coordination. Valara felt the old fear. Not of dying, of failing. She closed her eyes briefly. Then she remembered the child in the field. "Then stay." Her eyes opened. "Forward units," she commanded, voice amplified across the battlefield. "Collapse formation Gamma. Draw them into the funnel. Dominion artillery, mark my beacon." Explosions rippled through the canyon. Humans fought shoulder to shoulder with air and shock troops. Where one line faltered, another stepped in. No one ran. The Overmind's gambit. Midway through the assault, scanners detected something new. A massive neural construct emerging from the central bioship. The Overmind had manifested physically. It towered above the battlefield, an armored lattice of pulsing synaptic tissue protected by layers of adaptive chitin. If that thing establishes a planetary anchor, a Dominion analyst shouted over comms, we lose orbital superiority. Valara understood immediately. The swarm was no longer merely attacking. It was attempting to root itself, to turn Terra Nova 3 into a breeding world. She opened a direct channel to all forces. That construct is the Nexus. Sever it, and the swarm collapses into disarray. That thing is suicide, Elias said. Yes, she agreed. There was no hesitation this time. No retreat order forming in her throat. She activated her jump thrusters and surged forward with a strike team of human and Aran veterans. Plasma fire tore through the air around them. They advanced meter by meter. Soldiers fell. Others stepped over them. The Overmind unleashed psychic disruption waves that rattled thought itself. Several troops dropped, clutching their helmets. Valara pressed on. She had faced this presence before, felt its cold, analytical awareness brush against her mind at Virex Prime. Back then, she had turned away. Now she locked onto it. You don't get this world, she whispered. The moment they reached the base of the Overmind construct, its armor regenerated as fast as they could damage it. Core is shielded, a human sergeant shouted. Valara scanned rapidly. There. A fluctuating synaptic channel pulsing beneath layered plates. Concentrate fire on my mark. They unleashed everything. Plasma, rail bursts, shaped charges. Cracks spiderwebbed across the armor. The Overmind shifted. Focus. Its full psychic weight crashed against Valara. Images flooded her mind. Virex burning. Billions screaming. Her retreat. Her shame. It tried to break her the way it had before. But something was different. This time, she wasn't alone. Through the neural assault, she heard human voices shouting. Aran warriors roaring defiance. Elias's steady tone over comms. We're with you. The pressure faltered. Valara screamed and drove her blade, a focused gravitic edge, into the exposed synaptic channel. Light erupted. The Overmind convulsed. And then, it shattered. Silence. Across the battlefield, Corthan organisms froze mid-strike. Their coordination dissolved. Without the Overmind's centralized control, they reverted to chaotic, instinctive movements. Orbital cannons finished the bioships. Ground forces methodically dismantled what remained. For the first time since the swarm's resurgence, the galaxy witnessed a complete Corthan collapse. Redemption. Weeks later, representatives from 12 species gathered on Terra Nova 3. Valara stood before them in restored command armor, no longer in exile. The Dominion High Chancellor bowed her head. You are reinstated as commander of the Allied Defense Coalition. The title meant something different now. Not authority over fleets. Responsibility for unity. Valara looked over the crowd. Aran, Human, Talaran, Kesh, dozens more. Her gaze found Elias. He simply nodded. She stepped forward. At Virex Prime, she said, voice steady. I believed survival was victory. She let the silence hold. I was wrong. She gestured to the gathered allies. Victory is choosing to stand when running would be easier. It is fighting not because you are certain to win, but because the cost of surrender is too great. A faint smile touched her lips. The swarm will return in other forms. Darkness always does. Her voice hardened. But now the galaxy knows something it did not know before. She lifted her chin. We do not run. Epilogue years later. The war did not end in a single battle, but it changed. World after world adopted the Terra Nova doctrine. Coordinated choke point defenses. Cross-species tactical integration. Distributed command structures resistant to psychic disruption. The swarm, once unstoppable, fractured under sustained unified resistance. And in the center of it all stood a woman who had once been called a coward. Children on distant planets learned a new name in their history streams. Valara Threx. Not the butcher of Virex, but the commander who stood. On Terra Nova 3, the canyon where the Overmind fell became a memorial site. Wind moved through golden fields as it always had. Valara often visited alone. One evening, Elias joined her. "Do you ever think about leaving?" he asked. She watched the twin suns dip below the horizon. "I ran across half the galaxy," she said softly. And she smiled, calm, steady, unburdened. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Above them, Allied ships patrolled peacefully across a sky no longer filled with fire. And somewhere beyond the stars, in the dark between galaxies, something ancient and patient observed the light growing brighter. It calculated. It waited. But this time, the galaxy was waiting too. And when the next shadow rose, they would not flee. They would not fracture. They would remember the words that changed everything. Stand and fight.